The emergency alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chambers as delegates from across the galaxy gathered in panic. The holographic display showed something that made even the bravest species tremble. Entire star systems going dark one by one. Ambassador Kelthara from the Vorthok Alliance stood at the center. Her usually calm demeanor shattered. 15 worlds, she whispered, her voice breaking. 15 of our most beautiful planets are ... gone. The council members leaned forward as the display zoomed in on what used to be Vorthok Prime, where once stood gleaming cities and lush forests. Now, only twisted crystalline structures pulsed with an eerie light. These weren't ordinary crystals. They moved, breathed, and grew larger with each passing moment. The Devourers, Kelthara continued, they consume everything living. Trees, animals, even our people. Within hours, flesh becomes crystal. Within days, entire continents transform into these ... things. The Zentari representative, known for their advanced medical technology, spoke up nervously. Our bioscanners cannot even identify what these parasites are made of. They seem to rewrite the very structure of organic matter. Our quantum shields are useless, added the Korgan military advisor. Energy weapons only make them grow faster. We've tried everything: plasma bombardment, nanodisruptors, even temporal stasis fields. Nothing works. Meanwhile, millions of light years away on Earth, Commander Hyanwu sat in his modest office at Deep Space Command. Unlike the pristine alien facilities, his workspace was cluttered with coffee cups, data tablets, and photos of his family back in Seoul. His team crowded around the transmission they'd just intercepted from the Galactic Council. "Sir, they're asking every species for help," reported Lieutenant Minasio, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The Zephyrians offered their best scientists. The Altarians are sending their most advanced research vessels. Dr. Sojin, Earth's lead xenobiologist, studied the footage with fascination rather than horror. "Look at the way these crystals spread," she said, pointing at the screen. "It's almost like watching coral growth, but accelerated 1,000 times. Commander Hyanwu rubbed his chin thoughtfully. While other species saw an impossible threat, he saw something different. Earth had dealt with biological nightmares before, from flesh-eating bacteria to aggressive cancers. Humans had learned to fight dirty when survival was at stake. "Prepare a response team," he ordered quietly. "Not our scientists or diplomats." He paused, looking at the crystalline horrors on screen. "Send our specialists, the ones who've worked in Chernobyl, survived Ebola outbreaks, and cleaned up oil spills in the Amazon." His team exchanged glances. They knew exactly what kind of people he meant. The kind other species would call crazy. Admiral Jihai walked through the recruitment center, watching as volunteers lined up outside her office. These weren't the polished officers or brilliant academics that other species typically sent on diplomatic missions. These were Earth's outcasts, risk-takers, and adrenaline junkies. The first person in line was Sergeant Tejo, a man whose military record read like a horror story. He'd survived 3 tours in the most dangerous conflict zones on Earth, volunteered for bomb disposal duty, and once spent 6 months in a radiation-contaminated facility fixing critical systems. When most people would have asked for hazard pay, he'd asked for overtime. "You understand this might be a one-way trip?" Admiral Jihai asked him directly. Tejo shrugged with a slight smile. "Ma'am, I've been on plenty of those already. At least this time it's not on Earth, so my mother won't worry as much." Behind him stood Dr. So-young, a virologist who had made her reputation studying the deadliest pathogens known to humanity. While other scientists worked in sterile laboratories, she preferred fieldwork in places like disease-ravaged villages and contaminated research sites. Her colleagues often joked that she treated Ebola samples like other people treated houseplants. "The alien samples we've seen," Admiral Jihai began, but Dr. So-young interrupted her with excitement. "Oh, I've already reviewed the preliminary data, she said, her eyes lighting up. The way these devourers rewrite cellular structure is absolutely fascinating. I have 17 different theories about how they might be vulnerable to targeted biological interference. The Admiral raised an eyebrow. And you're not concerned about the fact that they've destroyed 15 entire worlds? Well, yes, that's unfortunate, Dr. Soyoung replied thoughtfully. But think about what we could learn from them. No Earth organism has ever shown this level of rapid biological conversion. The research possibilities are endless. In the corner of the room, biologist Mina was already examining tissue samples from the infected worlds, while the alien observers who had delivered them stood as far away as possible. She leaned in closer with her microscope, making excited notes. "This is incredible," she muttered to herself. "Look how they've managed to preserve the basic cellular structure while completely altering its function. It's like biological engineering on a scale we've never imagined." The Zantari observer, Ambassador Kelmore, watched these humans with growing alarm. "Admiral, I must express concern. Your species seems to view this catastrophe as an opportunity rather than a threat." Admiral Jihai looked around at her volunteers' former disaster response teams who had cleaned up nuclear accidents, marine biologists who had studied life in volcanic vents, and survival specialists who had thrived in places that would kill most people within minutes. "Ambassador," she said calmly, "other species see problems. We see puzzles that need solving." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the quarantine zone, and immediately every sensor on the bridge started screaming warnings. Captain Dongmin stood calmly at the viewport, sipping his coffee while his crew worked around him. "Sir, the radiation levels are off the charts," reported Navigation Officer J1. "The Galactic Council ships are maintaining a distance of 50 million kilometers. And we're going how close?" Captain Dongmin asked. "Standard orbital approach, sir. About 400 kilometers." The alien liaison officer, a Vorthok named Veltar, turned pale. "Captain, that's within the contamination zone. No ship has survived closer than 10 million kilometers." Captain Dongmin just nodded and took another sip of coffee. "Good thing. We brought extra radiation shielding then." As they approached the first infected world, the main screen revealed something that made the alien crew members rush for the exits. What had once been a beautiful blue-green planet now looked like a massive tumor floating in space. Crystalline structures jutted out from the surface like infected wounds, pulsing within sickly orange light. "My God," whispered Communications Officer Hiron, but her voice carried fascination rather than fear. "It's still growing. Look at those formations. They're spreading across the continents in real time." The Vorthok liaison was backing toward the door. "This is madness. We should leave immediately. The very sight of those things has driven some of our people insane." Dr. Yoonji, however, was leaning closer to her scanner displays with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. She had spent years studying bacteria that thrived in conditions that would melt most metals, and to her, this was just another extreme environment. "Fascinating," she murmured, adjusting her instruments. "The crystalline structures are maintaining organic, cellular functions while completely restructuring the material composition. It's almost like certain fungal networks I've studied in deep ocean thermal vents." "You mean this reminds you of something from Earth?" Captain Dongmin asked. "Well, not exactly the same, but the spreading pattern is very similar to how some fungi take over entire forest ecosystems. They don't just kill the host, they repurpose it." She paused, making notes. "Though obviously, these devourers are far more aggressive and efficient." While the alien observers watched in horror from the safety of the corridor, the human crew methodically began collecting data. Sensor specialist Min Jun launched probes directly into the infected atmosphere, something the Galactic Council had declared impossible. "Probes are holding steady," he reported, "getting clear readings from the surface. The crystalline formations appear to be hollow in some sections, almost like they're building infrastructure. Captain Dongmin nodded approvingly. Infrastructure means intelligence. Intelligence means we can figure out how they think. The Vorthok liaison stared at them in disbelief. How are you people so calm about this? Dr. Yunji looked up from her data with a slight smile. Because on Earth, we've learned that the scariest looking things usually have the simplest weaknesses. While the Galactic Council's most advanced technology sat useless outside the quarantine zone, team leader Jae-sung was suiting up for what everyone else considered a death sentence. He had spent 20 years mining in the deepest, most dangerous tunnels on Earth, where cave-ins and toxic gases were daily concerns. Atmospheric readings show the air inside those crystal formations is completely toxic, warned the Zentari science officer. Our computer models predict immediate organ failure for any known species. Jae-sung just checked his equipment one more time. Good thing I'm not a known species then, he replied with a grin. His mining gear looked primitive compared to the sleek alien technology, but it had kept him alive in places where million-credit sensors had failed. Beside him, cave rescue specialist Hyjin was preparing her own equipment. She had pulled people out of collapsed mines, flooded caverns, and gas-filled underground chambers that would have killed most life forms instantly. To her, the Devourer hives looked like just another dangerous cave system. The Vorthok military tried sending in their best soldiers, she noted, studying the tactical reports. They lasted about 30 seconds before the crystalline structures overwhelmed them. That's because they went in clean, Jae-sung replied, deliberately not sterilizing his equipment the way alien protocols demanded. They scrubbed away every bit of bacteria, every microorganism that might have helped them. The human teams descended into the first Devourer hive with equipment that horrified their alien observers. Instead of sterile, sealed environments, they used modified mining gear that allowed limited contact with the infected atmosphere. Instead of pure oxygen, they breathed filtered air that still contained Earth bacteria within the first hour. Something unexpected happened. The crystalline structures that had aggressively consumed everything else began to recoil from the human presence. Where alien soldiers had been converted within minutes, the humans moved through the tunnels with only minor irritation. This is incredible, radioed Dr. Min-woo from the surface. The Devourers are actually retreating from your position. Hyjin examined a section of crystal wall that was visibly dissolving where she had touched it. It's like they can't handle the bacteria we're carrying. Our normal skin flora is acting like acid to them. The breakthrough came when Jae-sung accidentally cut his hand on a sharp crystal edge, instead of the infection spreading into his bloodstream. As everyone expected, the crystalline formation around the wound began crumbling and turning black. Command, you need to see this, he called up to the ship. My blood just killed about 10 square meters of their structure. Back on the surface, Dr. Yunji was practically bouncing with excitement as she analyzed the samples. Of course, these Devourers evolved in sterile environments. They've never encountered the chaotic bacterial warfare that every human carries naturally. What the Council sees as contamination is actually our greatest weapon. The alien observers watched in amazement as humans accomplished in hours what their most advanced civilizations couldn't manage in months. The answer hadn't been cleaner technology or stronger weapons. Sometimes, the best solution was just being wonderfully, chaotically dirty. Captain Seojin stood in the command tent, watching his teams prepare for what the Galactic Council was calling biological terrorism. To him, it was just Tuesday. He had spent years fighting forest fires, containing oil spills, and cleaning up industrial disasters that would have sent other species running for their home planets. Sir, the Zentari representatives are requesting we reconsider our approach, reported Lieutenant Dobbin, trying not to smile. They're calling our methods barbarically unsanitary. Tell them we appreciate their concern. Captain Seokajin replied, checking his equipment. But when your house is on fire, You don't worry about getting the carpet wet. The alien observers had retreated to what they considered a safe distance, about 50 kilometers away, while human teams moved directly into infected zones with spray equipment that looked like it belonged in a pest-controlled truck rather than a military operation. Dr. Young-Soo had spent the past week in his mobile laboratory, doing something that made the alien scientists physically ill to watch. He was deliberately cultivating the most aggressive bacteria from human volunteers, growing cultures that thrived in conditions that would sterilize most known environments. The beauty of this approach, he explained to his horrified counterpart, is that we're not trying to kill the devourers with poison. We're introducing competition they've never encountered. His latest creation was a modified version of common human gut bacteria, engineered to be even more aggressive than usual. When deployed through simple spray bottles, it created bacterial colonies that the devourers couldn't consume without destroying themselves in the process. Team Alpha, led by former hazmat specialist Wu Jin, was implementing what they called controlled contamination protocols. Instead of trying to keep environments clean, they were deliberately making them dirty in precisely calculated ways. Deploying bacterial agents in Sector 7, Wu Jin reported calmly, as if he were announcing the weather. Around him, crystalline structures that had stood for months began showing signs of decay within minutes of exposure to Earth. Microorganisms. The results were spectacular and terrifying to watch. Entire devourer hives began collapsing as their crystalline foundations couldn't cope with the biological chaos that humans carried naturally. What had seemed like unstoppable alien technology crumbled under the assault of microscopic life forms that every human took for granted. But the victories came at a cost. Specialist Kyung Ho was hospitalized after exposure to concentrated devourer toxins. Sergeant Borum lost 3 fingers when a dying crystal formation exploded unexpectedly. 2 members of the advanced team never made it out of a collapsing hive, yet for every casualty, 2 more volunteers arrived from Earth. They came from disaster response teams, industrial cleanup crews, and medical facilities that dealt with the worst biological hazards humanity had ever encountered. "Why do they keep coming?" asked Ambassador Velter, genuinely confused by human behavior. Captain Seok-jin looked at the latest batch of volunteers, people who had left comfortable lives, to fight impossible odds on alien worlds. "Because someone has to do it," he said simply. "And we're very good at doing things that seem impossible." Captain Seok-jin stood in the command tent, watching his teams prepare for what the Galactic Council was calling biological terrorism. To him, it was just Tuesday. He had spent years fighting forest fires, containing oil spills, and cleaning up industrial disasters that would have sent other species running for their home planets. "Sir, the Zentari representatives are requesting we reconsider our approach," reported Lieutenant Dobbin, trying not to smile. "They're calling our methods barbarically unsanitary. Tell them we appreciate their concern." Captain Seok-jin replied, checking his equipment. "But when your house is on fire, you don't worry about getting the carpet wet." The alien observers had retreated to what they considered a safe distance, about 50 kilometers away, while human teams moved directly into infected zones with spray equipment that looked like it belonged in a pest-controlled truck rather than a military operation. Dr. Young-Soo had spent the past week in his mobile laboratory, doing something that made the alien scientists physically ill to watch. He was deliberately cultivating the most aggressive bacteria from human volunteers, growing cultures that thrived in conditions that would sterilize most known environments. The beauty of this approach, he explained to his horrified counterpart, is that we're not trying to kill the devourers with poison. We're introducing competition they've never encountered. His latest creation was a modified version of common human gut bacteria, engineered to be even more aggressive than usual. When deployed through simple spray bottles, it created bacterial colonies that the devourers couldn't consume without destroying themselves in the process. Team Alpha, led by former hazmat specialist Wu Jin, was implementing what they called controlled contamination protocols. Instead of trying to keep environments clean, they were deliberately making them dirty in precisely calculated ways. Deploying bacterial agents in Sector 7, Wu Jin reported calmly, as if he were announcing the weather. Around him, crystalline structures that had stood for months began showing signs of decay. Within minutes of exposure to Earth microorganisms, the results were spectacular and terrifying to watch. Entire devourer hives began collapsing as their crystalline foundations couldn't cope with the biological chaos that humans carried naturally. What had seemed like unstoppable alien technology crumbled under the assault of microscopic life forms that every human took for granted, but the victories came at a cost. Specialist Kyung Ho was hospitalized after exposure to concentrated devourer toxins. Sergeant Borum lost 3 fingers when a dying crystal formation exploded unexpectedly. 2 members of the advanced team never made it out of a collapsing hive. Yet for every casualty, 2 more volunteers arrived from Earth. They came from disaster response teams, industrial cleanup crews, and medical facilities that dealt with the worst biological hazards humanity had ever encountered. "Why do they keep coming?" asked Ambassador Veltar, genuinely confused by human behavior. "Captain," Seokajin looked at the latest batch of volunteers, people who had left comfortable lives, to fight impossible odds on alien worlds. "Because someone has to do it," he said simply. "And we're very good at doing things that seem impossible." The medical bay on the human command ship looked like something from a horror movie to the alien observers. Corporal Minho lay on a biobed, his right leg, now a mixture of flesh and living crystal that pulsed with its own internal light. The infection had been stopped, but it couldn't be reversed. "How do you feel?" asked Dr. Sojin, checking his vitals with equipment that beeped reassuringly. Minho flexed his crystalline leg experimentally. "Different. I can sense devour activity within a kilometer now. It's like having a biological radar system built into my body." He paused, looking down at his transformed limb. "My wife is going to have questions when I get home." 3 beds. Over. Sergeant Hae-young was learning to use prosthetic arms after losing both hands in a hive collapse. She was already asking when she could return to active duty. 2 floors down, the memorial wall listed the names of 17 volunteers who hadn't made it back from experimental procedures. The Vorthok ambassador couldn't understand what she was witnessing. "These casualties would have ended any military operation for my people. Your volunteers know they might die or be permanently changed, yet more keep arriving." Admiral Jihai stood at the viewport, watching another transport ship dock with their station. "We received over 10,000 new applications yesterday. The waiting list for volunteer positions is 6 months long. But why?" the ambassador pressed. "Your people have already done enough. The infection is retreating on 12 worlds. Why do they keep coming?" Before the admiral could answer, Specialist Jung-woo walked past them toward the docking bay. Half his face showed the distinctive scarring from exposure to concentrated devourer toxins, and his left eye had been replaced with a cybernetic implant that could see into crystalline structures. "Because it's the hardest job in the galaxy right now," he said simply, overhearing their conversation, "and humans love hard jobs." The newest batch of volunteers included a deep-sea welder who wanted to work inside active devourer hives, a volcanologist excited about studying crystalline formations at their source, and a former test pilot who had heard about experimental procedures that had a 60% survival rate. Dr. Young-soo was interviewing candidates in his laboratory, surrounded by samples that made experienced soldiers nervous. "Why do you want to volunteer for biological integration testing?" he asked a young woman from Earth's Antarctic research station. "Because nobody else will," she replied matter-of-factly, "and because if we don't figure out how these things work, they might spread to other systems." The alien observers finally began to understand something fundamental about humanity. While other species saw danger and backed away, humans saw danger and leaned in closer. They didn't just accept risk, they were attracted to it. Your species doesn't have a survival instinct, observed the Zentari psychologist after weeks of studying human behavior. Oh, we do? Corrected Admiral Ji-Hai with a slight smile. It's just that our definition of survival includes making sure the impossible things get done. 6 months after the last devourer, Hive had fallen silent. Engineer Jun-Ho stood on what used to be the most infected world in the Vorthok system, where crystalline nightmares had once pulsed with alien hunger. Now green shoots were pushing through the soil. His cleanup crews had worked around the clock, using techniques that made the Galactic Council's environmental specialists shake their heads in disbelief. The soil composition readings are incredible, reported environmental specialist Nar, her scanner beeping excitedly. The bacterial colonies we introduced aren't just breaking down the crystalline remains. They're actually enriching the soil beyond its original fertility levels. Jun-Ho nodded, watching his teams operate massive biodigesters that looked like they'd been borrowed from a wastewater treatment plant. To the aliens, it seemed primitive. To humans who had cleaned up oil spills, nuclear accidents, and toxic waste sites, it was just another day at the office. The Zentari Environmental Committee predicted this cleanup would take 40 years minimum, noted Dr. Su-Jin, who was documenting everything for what was rapidly becoming the galactic standard for ecological restoration. Their computer models couldn't account for controlled bacterial acceleration. The secret was something humanity had learned from decades of environmental disasters on Earth. Sometimes the fastest way to clean up a mess was to introduce something that would eat it. While alien civilizations tried to remove contamination through sterile processes, humans had learned to fight pollution with controlled biological warfare. Team leader, One-Seek, was directing the placement of what he called bacterial bombs. Concentrated cultures of Earth, microorganisms designed to consume specific types of contamination. Drop them in the water supply, and within weeks, the entire ecosystem starts healing itself. He explained to fascinated Vorthok observers. The results were so impressive that survivors who had been hiding in underground shelters for months emerged, to find their worlds not just habitable, but actually improved. The soil was richer, the water was cleaner, and the air quality was better than it had been before the Devourer invasion. How is this possible? Asked Survivor Group leader Kethara, looking out over fields that were already showing signs of new plant growth. Our world was completely contaminated. Our own scientists said it would be uninhabitable for centuries. Dr. Su-Jin smiled, checking her latest soil samples. Earth has been dealing with biological disasters for millions of years. We've learned that nature doesn't just want to heal, it wants to improve. You just have to give it the right tools. The most shocking discovery came when agricultural teams realized that crops grown in the former infection zones were producing yields 30% higher than normal. The bacterial cocktails used to destroy the Devourers had created super fertile soil conditions. Your people didn't just save our worlds, Kethra told Engineer Jun-Ho at the dedication ceremony. You made them better than they were before. Jun-Ho just shrugged, already planning the next phase of restoration work. That's what we do. We don't just fix problems, we upgrade them. 1 year after the Vorthok crisis ended, the Galactic Council chambers looked very different. Instead of polished marble and sterile surfaces, one entire section had been converted into what looked like a disaster response command center, complete with rough metal desks and coffee-stained equipment that actually worked when everything else failed. Director Wu Jin sat at the center of it all, reviewing applications from species across the galaxy, who had suddenly discovered they needed help with problems they'd previously considered impossible to solve. His desk was cluttered with datapads, empty energy drink containers, and requests for assistance that would have terrified most civilizations. Sir, we've got 3 new emergency requests, reported Coordinator G1, placing yet another stack of files on his already overflowing desk. The Altarians have a plague of metal-eating nanobots that's consuming their infrastructure. The Corvani system is dealing with a rogue AI that's turned their entire defense network against them. and the Zelthara want our help with what they're calling impossible atmospheric chemistry on their colony worlds. Director Wu Jin smiled, sipping his coffee from a mug that read Earth's finest disaster specialists. Schedule them all. Send Team Alpha to handle the nanobots. They love that kind of technical challenge. Team Beta can tackle the AI problem. We've got some cyber warfare specialists who've been getting bored, and the atmospheric chemistry issue sounds perfect for our chemical engineers. The transformation had been remarkable to watch. What started as a desperate plea for help had evolved into something the galaxy had never seen before, a formal recognition that when civilized solutions failed, you called the crazy humans from Earth. The Deathworld response corps had recruiting centers on every major world now, but the headquarters on Earth was always packed with volunteers. Former firefighters stood in line next to deep-sea welders. Nuclear cleanup specialists chatted with volcanologists, and extreme environment researchers compared notes with people who'd survived plane crashes in remote locations. "Why do you want to join?" Director Wu Jin asked a young woman who'd traveled from the outer colonies just to volunteer. "Because my grandfather was part of the Vorthok cleanup mission," she replied proudly. "He used to tell stories about solving problems that made genius aliens give up and cry. I want to do that too." The Galactic Council had learned something important about the universe. Sometimes, the most advanced technology and brilliant scientific minds weren't enough. Sometimes you needed people who looked at impossible problems and said, "Hold my coffee, and watch this." Ambassador Veltar, who had once begged for Earth's help in desperation, now served as the official liaison to the Deathworld Response Corps. When the impossible happens, she would tell new species joining the council, "Don't panic, just call the humans." Director Wu Jin looked up at the latest mission briefing. Something about sentient storms that were terrorizing a peaceful agricultural world. He grinned and reached for his communicator. "Attention, all teams," he announced. "We've got another impossible problem that needs solving. Who wants to fight whether that thinks?" The response was immediate and enthusiastic. After all, it was Tuesday, and humans were always ready for the next impossible challenge.